Hey, Diane, how are you?
Great. How are you? Can you hear me?
I can hear you just
Yes.
fine.
Can you hear
Fantastic.
us?
Got a new computer, so I'm just checking it all out.
Yeah. Hi, it's nice to meet you.
Good to meet you too.
I got to hear your pre-recording not too long ago, like earlier this morning. I'm like, oh, I can't wait to talk to you and listen to your story.
Oh my gosh. Well, it's been a while since I said all that, so I'll have to refresh my memory.
Oh, Diane, we needed that laugh today. I'm freaking exhausted. So we went and saw Wanda Sykes last night, and it's about a 2-hour drive from our house. Then got up at 6:30 this morning and drove back here so we could record all day. So in our earlier recordings, I'd had like 4 coffees and a Coke. I am now not drinking any caffeine because I have the shakes. I think I have a little bit of Parkinson's just from the amount of caffeine I had. But it was so worth it. She was so great in concert, and she's just hysterical, as a reverend can be.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah. Well, welcome.
Ready?
3,
2,
2,
1.
What? I always feel bad flipping off whoever our guest is because I'm like, they don't know. They have no idea that the number one in our countdown is always us flipping each other off. So
Because we're 5.
we're 5. Yeah. Welcome back to another episode of Shit That Goes On in Our Heads. I'm Dirty Skittles, and I'm joined by my co-host.
And I'm G-Rex.
And our guest today, Diane. How are you, Diane?
Great. I'm happy to be here. This is going to be a wild ride.
I know. Buckle up. We never script anything. So it's just, we just kind of go for it and see what happens. What did you have for breakfast, Diane?
Oh, oatmeal.
Nice. Okay. All right. Do you do anything like fun with it, like fruits or coconut or?
Meal, protein powder, raisins, frozen cherries,
Oh, yum.
and walnuts.
That's really good.
Wow, that sounds delicious. I had a Reese's peanut butter cup. It was awesome. It was 6:30 in the morning. I was hungry. We had to get on the road.
You eat like my 6-year-old. If I could let him eat and pick his own breakfast, it would be Reese's peanut butter cups for sure.
There's some protein in there somewhere. Okay.
Yeah, and chocolate's supposed to be really good for our brains.
Yeah.
Oh.
See? I just got vindicated. Thank you. Diane, thank you.
Well, thank you for being with us, Diane. I'm dying to hear your story. I heard a little bit in the pre-interview where you tell us a little bit about your childhood. Where'd you grow up?
I grew up all over the place. My father was an Air Force pilot, so we moved every year or two. I went to 10 different schools before I graduated from high school.
Wow.
Wow.
Oh, my word.
Yeah, so that was a little unsettling. And also, I grew up in, my father was up in the air a lot because he was a pilot. And so my mother was the main influence. And for years, I thought there was something wrong with me because I could never seem to satisfy her expectations. From, physical appearance to my ideas, to my behaviors, everything was just, in her opinion, wrong. So I'd go to my room with library books and, read like crazy after dinner, and books would open up doors to other worlds. I met all kinds of wonderful people like Eleanor Roosevelt in books, The Diary of Anne Frank. I read history, I read novels, but especially loved biographies because I could relate to the people and see, how they'd managed to overcome obstacles in their lives. So that was very inspirational.
Wow. So as far back as you can remember, at the farthest your memories go, your mom was always sort of that type of an influence for you?
Yeah, I later learned when I got a master's in counseling that she had narcissism. And it wasn't, this was a really consistent pattern for her. She was very focused in on her own needs. And so I was trained like a dog, actually, trained
Wow.
to tune into what she wanted. And so I became very conscious of other people's feelings and other people's needs, and not too conscious of my own, because those were always being put down.
Right.
So yeah, it was a strange kind of childhood. What I also, though, loved was nature and books. So I remember climbing a huge redwood tree next to our house when we lived on Hamilton Air Force Base in Northern California, and coming higher and higher until I could look down at the roof of my parents' house and the balcony outside their bedroom. And I was above it all and one with the tree, and felt this incredible sense of oneness with nature and empowerment. And then obviously I climbed down, but have felt a sense of connection to nature ever since. Nature was a consolation, really. And later in life, I studied Eastern philosophy. I studied Taoism, which teaches, actually, it's still there. I've written 3 books on Taoism by now, but that we're all one, yin and yang combine in a larger unity of oneness, and that each part of nature is equally valuable because we're all part of the larger whole. So I found inspiration in nature, in Eastern philosophy, and in books. But meanwhile, since I was still a child, I physically lived at home in my parents' various houses. And I remember thinking, what I really want to do is go away to college, because that would get me away from this influence that was really restricting. So when we lived in Germany at Ramstein Air Force Base, I sent away for college catalogs. In those days, there was no internet, really long time ago. We did have telephones. I mean, we weren't totally uncivilized, but I got all these catalogs, and I had this dream of going to UCLA. So I filled out all the applications, sent them in, and was absolutely delighted when I got my acceptance to UCLA, told all my friends, I'm going to UCLA. This is fantastic. And meanwhile, my father's next assignment was in Southern California at Norton Air Force Base near Riverside. So I was packing up in August. We moved back in June and July from Germany through the United States, unpacked, and moved into this suburban house outside of Riverside and into my bedroom, which was actually had all my mother's childhood furniture in it, including a life-size doll, which was sitting in a rocking chair next to the bed. And everything was pink and white, colors that I really didn't like. I was, much more into nature, books. There was no room for a bookcase. There was nothing. So I was really ready to get away from the suffocating world of pink that was like Pepto-Bismol, Yeah. But I was packing up, had my clothes set out. And my mother came into the room and said, what are you doing? And I said, it's August. I'm packing up to go to UCLA, I'm going to move into it in a few weeks. And she said, well, my dear, your father and I have talked, and we've decided to transfer your acceptance to UC Riverside, so you don't need to go away to college.
So you had to stay home? That was the plan?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
I felt trapped. And I said, well, why? And she said, we can't afford it. Walked out of the room. And I thought, oh my gosh, I'm stuck in this Pepto-Bismol pink world. I have no recourse, and my parents have financial problems. But that really wasn't true, because she got a new Mercedes for Christmas that year.
Wow.
So that there was just no logic in that family of origins world. So I figured, okay, I've got to get money and I've got to move out, because if they choose not to afford it. So what I did, I had a friend who lived across the street who was also trapped in suburbia with his parents. His father was in the Air Force, and Brad had just come from New York, where he had gone to high school and was stuck. So we became really good friends, studied Eastern philosophy, started meditating. And he said, it's really important what you have inside. You need to listen to your inner voice, not to the voices around you. And I thought, hey, that sounds good. So I started getting little part-time jobs over the summer with a temp agency, and was one day driving down 14th Street in Riverside on a Friday, coming back from my most recent part-time job, and passed the Riverside Press Enterprise, which was our local newspaper. And a voice inside my head said, this was not the shit that goes on in my head. Okay? It's a good voice. My intuition said, you're a writer. You should work there. And I thought, I didn't think. I just turned the car around, made a U-turn, went into the parking lot, walked in there at age 19, a shy teenager, and said, hi, I'm Diane Dreher. I'm a writer. I'd like to apply for a job, to a reporter in the newsroom. And he said, well, you need to go upstairs to the personnel office. So I did that, filled out some papers, and they said, our college intern just gave notice this morning. Can you start work on Monday?
Wow.
And the job was flexible hours, 20 hours a week. I was an editorial intern, and I could work it around my class schedule. And I made enough money to pay for the dorms and my books and my tuition, and moved out of my parents' house gladly. And working at the Press Enterprise was wonderful because I met all these reporters who showed me what it means to be a writer. And, it was fantastic. It was another world. It combined my inner sense of calling with financial, power to be on my own. So I worked my way through college from then on. And I learned something really important, that there are voices outside of us who tell us who we should be. And if we don't watch out, those voices take up residence inside our heads.
Mm-hmm.
So I did move away from my physical parents' house, but for years, I still had my mother's voice inside my head, and without paying rent, occupying that space. And ever so often when I wanted something or wanted to work for something, this voice would just tell me, I'm not good enough. Who do you think you are? You're not good enough. You can't afford it. You can't do it, etc. Just this really negative voice. And from what I learned from Eastern philosophy, we can change the channels in our heads. We don't need to listen to that radio station. We can tune into a different one, which is deeper, more spiritual, more true. And I can tune into that, for example, in meditation or being out in nature, and really find a sense of inspiration and confirmation, which is a big contrast to the external, stuff. But this went on. So I managed to graduate from UC Riverside and met a professor there who was the first adult who really saw me. And what really helps us as human beings, I think, is that we need someone to see us as who we truly are, to acknowledge us as a worthwhile human being, to see our talents and our potential. So my professor, Stanley Stewart, had actually gotten his PhD at UCLA. I became his research assistant. In addition to working for the newspaper, I got paid money for reading books about Renaissance literature. Okay, I do that for free anyway, but I, take notes. And with his recommendation, I got a full graduate fellowship to UCLA.
Wow.
So I ended up going to UCLA after all and graduated summa cum laude as valedictorian of my graduating class.
Wow.
And that was okay. However, at the same time, my mother went and told all the relatives, well, now, Diane couldn't find anybody to marry her, so now she has to go to grad school.
What the hell? Oh my God. Wow.
I have so many questions.
Okay, so there's a real contrast here.
Yeah. Okay. So many questions. First, did your parents celebrate your successes at all?
Not really. My dad did, but he was often gone on long flights, so he wasn't around that much. But what he did when I got my teaching job up in Northern California was that he gave me his World War II gold pilot's watch with his name and serial number engraved on the back. And, from time to time, he would see me, when he was on the ground and not up in the air.
Do you still have the watch?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. It's one of my treasured possessions.
Oh, I love that. Do you think like your relationship with your mom at all, do you think it drove you to work as hard as you did?
Oh, sure. Excellent point, Dirty Skittles. Yeah, I learned to be a really hard worker because initially I figured that, okay, I wasn't very smart because I was told that, by her that I wasn't very smart, although some of my teachers thought otherwise. So I had to be a hard worker. So when I really, it's like when you push off from the side of a pool and you get momentum, that's what happened. I learned to work really hard. I learned to really focus. And that can be a good thing, because it's a skill, developed strength. It can also make a person who grows up codependent being a workaholic, working really hard to get other people's approval. So I need to be mindful of why I am working hard, whether it's for something that I care about personally, or if it's just to get somebody's acknowledgement or approval.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. And I have a random question. You said that occasionally you would hear that voice in your head, the shit that goes on in your head. Does it sound like you? Like, is it you talking to yourself? Does it have a sound?
Oh, that's a really good question. It has a sound, but it doesn't really sound like my voice. It sounds like my mother's voice. It sounds very authoritative.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Interesting. Well, I mean, hey, so the like bitter part of like my soul loves that you not only did this shit on your own, but you did it so well. Like you couldn't have gotten any better. Do you know what I mean? Like you're like, oh, I'm going to do this and I'm going to be the best at it. And I don't need you and I can do it on my own. And I think that is like amazing.
Yeah. Amazing. Like, wow, what an accomplishment. Like, and all on your own.
Yeah, although on my own as a person, but not necessarily on my own, because when I get inspiration to, for example, to go into the newspaper office the day that the college intern had quit, they hadn't even advertised the job yet. How did I know that? I really believe that we're all connected to a source that is much wiser and greater than any individual. And to connect to that source is really empowering. And it's like connecting to a source of love and inspiration. So when I am connected to the source, I flourish. When the shit goes on in my head, it becomes static that keeps me from tuning into that higher power.
Yeah. So it's kind of like when you climb the tree.
Yeah.
And you can look down and see. Interesting.
Yeah.
That's very interesting.
It's very interesting. And, I think about that too. Like a little bit like you, Diane, for years and years, right? I never could see myself the way everybody else saw me. So it took a lot of work for me to get past that. I mean, I'm almost to that point now, but it takes work of being like out in nature or doing things that I really connect with. And when I'm connecting, then it floods back to me, but in a good way. Like I don't hear the voices in my head that tell me that I'm not good enough or that, people are looking at me like I was 20 years ago. They don't, I look at myself now and how I accomplished what I accomplished, but I didn't have to do it with their help. I was able to do it on my own. So all the naysayers, fuck them, because you know what? I like ride my own boat. I'm all good.
That's beautiful. I love that, G-Rex, because I feel like what you said, when you feel connected to nature, you don't need those other naysayers. They're irrelevant.
So irrelevant. But, it took until I turned 60 to really figure that out. Like I literally I turned 59 Next day I turned 60 and I was like, you know what? I don't really fucking care what you say because I made my own person, right? I righted my wrongs. I worked really hard to get where I'm at. And I live in this beautiful place. We live on 8 acres in upstate New York and have so much nature around us. Like we have foxes, we have deer and rabbits, and squirrels, lots of squirrels. But that's where I find my connection. And I actually find my connection with my dad. So my dad and I were really close. He taught me all about nature and about fishing and, just everything. And that's how I find my connection with him. He's been gone since 2005. But when I'm out there, I can feel his presence and I can hear him saying, you're doing the right thing. So it holds so much truth with me.
That is so beautiful. I still feel connected to my dad too. Whenever I see a plane flying overhead, I think of him. I took flying lessons when I first moved up to Northern California because I wanted to be part of his world. I wanted to feel like, how could he do this? Because he discovered himself too. My dad grew up really poor in Kentucky. His mother was a very devout Catholic and she wanted him to be a priest. He was an only child and she was very strict and it was suffocating. So he worked his way through Catholic high school. He had paper routes and things. But what really excited him was aviation. He'd see these, in his day, little biplanes fly overhead. And one day he ran to the Louisville airport because he found out that you could get a quarter if you helped tie down a plane. And back then, during the Depression, a quarter was a lot of money. So he ran and he just got there in time and he saw the pilot get out of the plane. And he thought, I must fly. So he moved away from home at age 16, moved into the attic of the Louisville Flying Service and wouldn't have much to eat except for a bowl of bean soup, at night with a lot of crackers in it at the coffee shop there. Went to school during the day. And then when he came home, he talked to the pilots. And sometimes if he washed their plane and helped them, they'd take him up for a lesson. When he was 16 years old, that year, he became the youngest licensed pilot in Kentucky and went on to be an Air Force colonel flying jets, air rescue helicopters, big planes. And that was his way of getting above it. Yeah.
Yeah. Very similar.
Yeah.
You and your dad. That's really cool. Was he at all aware of the relationship you had with your mom?
I think to some extent, but again, he wasn't around when she'd say these mean things and he grew up really poor and she grew up as the daughter of a person who retired at age 30 as a very wealthy contractor in Southern California. So he felt socially, I suppose, inferior to my mother. So he didn't want to question her, but psychologically and spiritually, again, he was way up there in the atmosphere, way above a lot of people. I admire people like what G-Rex has done is that we need to discover who we are. And no one can tell us that. People can, recognize who we are, but we need to discover that. And when I did research on Renaissance literature, I realized that something really interesting happened between the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. And one of the things that happened was that their theology changed. In the Middle Ages, only priests, monks, and nuns were supposedly called by God to have some sort of meaningful spiritual life. By the Renaissance, theologians and philosophers said that everyone had a vocation. Everyone had specific talents that they were given, and it was their duty and their destiny to discover them and to use them to fulfill their own destinies, but also to serve the greater good. So you have Shakespeare, whose father was illiterate, who could only sign his name with an X. Michelangelo, whose father would beat him whenever he caught him drawing pictures when he was a little boy, because he said, that's a worthless occupation. You need to become a cloth merchant and bring money into the family. And Queen Elizabeth I, who, grew up in a dysfunctional family, to say the least. Her father executed a couple of his wives and, You can see why Elizabeth never married. Marriage was a scary undertaking. But again, she discovered her world in books, spoke 6 languages, and became the monarch of the new Renaissance England. So we have all these people, males, females, artists, scientists, saints, discovering who they were inside, finding their talents, their gifts, and bringing them forward. So we're all part of this larger mosaic, and it's up to each of us to fulfill our destiny to make the whole complete.
Wow.
I just love this so much. And, as you were talking, I also thought about, like all the influences I got from my mom. So my mom was a nurse for years and years, and I get a lot of my caring and compassion from her, right? So you put those two together, you put the caring and compassion together along with my love for nature. And I can say like over the last year, I've really come to figure out, who I am, what I love, and putting up walls so the outside noise doesn't get in. And it also happens to be like how I deal with my boundaries too, right? Like if it sounds like drama, I just don't want it anymore. I don't have time for it.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a big difference between drama and dharma, Dharma, the spiritual.
That needs to be a t-shirt. Somebody make that.
Yeah.
I need that.
What's really interesting is that I do research in positive psychology now, among other things. And in 2004, Martin Seligman and Chris Peterson came up with this book called Character Strengths and Virtues. And they'd done this huge international research project, which discovered, going back in time to the earliest written history of all the cultures that they could find around the world, they found that despite all the differences we human beings have, and if you watch the news, you can tell there are a lot of differences, that everyone agrees on 24 character strengths that are common to all humanity. Courage, curiosity, compassion, spirituality, many, love of beauty and excellence, nature, many of these, okay? And that each of us, according to the positive psychologists, have 5 top strengths. We all have all 24, but our 5 top strengths are our signature strengths, those that form our personality. And when we discover and use them, we become healthier, happier, and more successful. And they have empirical evidence to this, which, over 400 years ago in the Renaissance, this is what people believed. And it caused, I believe, the Renaissance.
Interesting. Yeah. I have some kind of fun questions. I'm curious, knowing or having all the stories that you've read about history, if you could go back to a certain point in time in history, where would you go? Or like if you could talk to anybody from history, who would you talk to?
Oh gosh, Queen Elizabeth I, a really courageous woman. I mean, she had to be. Shakespeare, because he didn't really travel. He didn't go anywhere. He lived in England. He traveled from Stratford upon Avon to London and back. And that was pretty much where he went. And yet his imagination took him all over the world and touched the hearts and still touches the hearts of so many people because he tapped into something that's universally human. And I'd also like to go back to 1776 because that's when our country was founded. And I used to be, they call that, a consultant for the National Endowment for the Humanities. And we would fly back from California or wherever we lived to Washington, D.C. to evaluate proposals. And one day I went to the National Archives and saw the Declaration of Independence. And I looked and I thought, only 56 people signed that document. 56. I mean, I chaired my English department at Santa Clara University. We had more than 56 faculty there, okay? We could have started our own country. But they pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor to something that they had never seen before, that had never existed before. And had they lost the revolution, they all would have been executed as traitors. And yet They believed in the possibility of a democracy here, and they made it happen. So I'd like to go back and talk to them.
That's so cool.
It is so cool. So, so cool.
If you could go back to a younger version of yourself and give yourself advice, how old would you be? And what would you say to yourself?
Oh, dear. That's an interesting question. Probably when I was about 12 years old, I would tell myself, you need to believe in your future. You need to believe in the journeys, the paths that some of these people have taken in the books that you love, and find your own way. And don't listen to the garbage that you hear around you.
I love that.
I love that
amazing.
so much. So you've asked me that question before. And for me, I would go back to like 21 and I would take the road less traveled. I wouldn't do what everybody else told me to do. I would like follow my own drum, my own beat.
Yeah.
Yeah, two roads diverged in the wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference, right?
Yeah.
To take our own road. And it usually is less traveled because, it's unique. We don't need to be carbon copies, Xerox copies of anybody else. They've already done that. What the world needs now is new inspiration, new possibilities. And we can only bring that forward by following that road less traveled.
That is like the perfect outro. Like, I'm like, I don't want to ruin it. It's so good. It's so good. I just got my son a book upstairs and it's called Wonder. And that is the heart of that story for him as a kid is don't be like anybody else, be like yourself because you're uniquely you. And there are things that you'll do that nobody else has done. And it's like this very inspiring book. And I absolutely love it. And we read it every night. It's now one of his favorite stories. And I think it's easy for us to lose ourselves or maybe never even find out who we are, right? And it's something that I think I'm still learning at my age of who I really am because I can get lost in work. I can get lost in my spouse. I can get lost with my parents, but there are those things that make me who I am that I am still learning what they are. And I'm trying so hard to like never forget them. And I take the pictures of things that make me happy because it reminds me like I love stuff that's outside of all of those other things that is just me. So I think it's such an important lesson. And the fact that you were able to do this and to follow your own path, despite, the challenges that would have taken some of us out and kind of our paths would have went a different way,
Yeah.
We were able to find you.
And the thing is, our culture does not reinforce us for being individuals, for discovering our own uniqueness. I mean, there are really sad cases of young people today who get lost on social media and, become incredibly depressed and anxious. The statistics are highly depressing because, they live in California's Silicon Valley, which invents all these things. Okay. And a lot of the people who are Silicon Valley CEOs don't let their children spend too much time on social media because they know how addictive it can become and how it can hijack our sense of self.
Yeah.
And so then, campus counseling centers on college campuses are absolutely swamped with disturbed, anxious, depressed college students because the messages they get from our culture to sell them products. You're not good enough unless you buy this thing. Okay. It's to find meaning, purpose, serenity, peace of mind in nature. That doesn't make them any money. So they want to make people feel inadequate in order to sell products. And social media makes people feel constantly on edge, so that these days, I think throughout our lifetimes, really, we need to be very mindful of what G-Rex was saying about boundaries. We need boundaries to fence off some of that garbage, some of that static noise, so that it doesn't take up lodging in our heads.
And that's so true. Like, because, when I was growing up, like, we didn't have cell phones, well, I think we had computers, but they were like ginormous, right? Nobody could afford them. But, I would be out from like the time the sun came up until the sun went down. We used our imagination to find ourselves, to define who we were, right? As kids. And I didn't really start using a computer until I went to college. But I think the kids today are missing out on that. And they're so focused on their electronics and not really doing that self-discovery phase of their life. And it makes me sad. They're the next generation. So please, I don't know, maybe get off your phone for a little bit.
Yeah. One of my favorite students at Santa Clara University was feeling uncomfortable because he didn't fit in, to what campus life was all about. Because, he was a vegetarian and he didn't drink because of his religious background. So beer parties and barbecues did not work for him. So I said, well, what does work? We get together and have coffee after class or whatever. I would talk to my students one-on-one. And he said, I love being in nature. So he founded this club called Into the Wild, in which students would go up and hike in the nearby mountains, and they'd have to leave their electronic devices at home. And then they'd feel free. They'd rejoice in the beauty of nature, and they'd come back feeling relaxed, refreshed, and renewed. And it became the most popular club on campus.
Oh, that's
more
great.
Popular than beer parties and barbecues. How about that?
That's pretty awesome.
I love that. This has been wonderful.
Yeah. So Diane, like, where can people find you, if they, want to learn more about you and things like that?
Okay. I have a website, which is, imagine that, DianeDreher.com, DianeDreher.com, which lists my books about nature and Eastern philosophy. Also, there's a link to my coaching practice, and there are meditations and blogs and all kinds of little bits of inspiration that they can find on my website.
I love how in tune you are with nature. That warms my heart, because nature, it just grounds you. It does. There's like so much wonderment about it. And I'm a big kid. If the deer come and eat on the side of the yard, I have to go watch. And, my wife's always like, be quiet, you're going to scare them away. And I'm like, a super spy. I'm like, I'm just going to open the door a little bit. But what's really cool for me, and it just really like warms my heart, is we have mama deer. And for the last 3 years, she's given birth to triplets. So we get to see the babies every year. And we have like 14 different deer trails in the back here. They can't just use one because they got to trample all over my grass.
He's got all those kids.
Yeah. we got all our kids. And to me, that, like, if I'm having a bad day, I will go outside. Even if I see one of my 8 billion dumb squirrels. But to me, that is my connection. So we got to see the solar eclipse on Monday. And it was cloudy. It was kind of gross and super cold. But the thing that will always stick within me is that we got totality. And so I got to see a sunrise and a sunset at the exact same time. And I thought, man, I'm never going to get to see this again, because the next one's in 2045 and I'll be 82. So God willing, if I'm still alive, I am going to go to Colorado so I can see that. But it was as cold as it was. It sent chills down my spine. And the other cool thing was a lot of parents took their kids out of school to see this. And they were so engaged and so much wonderment in their eyes. It warmed my heart. It made me feel like maybe these kids will remember this one time in their life that they got to see this. I mean, these were young kids. They were like 4 or 5 years old. But just to see like the look on their face when they saw it, it warmed my heart. I don't have any kids. I have 8 cats. If you want to call them kids, we can. But I thought it was really awesome.
Yeah, I do phone banking for Native American reservations in Arizona, and learned that from my Native American colleagues that an eclipse is a sacred event. And they recognize our connection with nature, and they say prayers, and, it's like the end of one shadow and the beginning of new light. And you can release all kinds of old stuff, and, there are rituals involved. And I thought, maybe, what has really caused so much disturbance in our country and our world is when people feel disconnected from each other, from nature, and from a deeper sense of themselves. And the fact that we had so many people sharing the eclipse, we didn't get much of it out here in Northern California, just got a little bite out of the sun. But still, the fact that this happened, at this time, and so many people will remember it forever, really, is something that unites us in wonder at the grandeur and beauty of nature.
Yeah. I love this.
Oh my God. Thank you so much, Diane. Oh my God. Thank you. Thank you.
It's been amazing.
Thank you for the inspiration, both of you.
Oh, yeah. Hey. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Diane. I appreciate you coming on, sharing your story.
Hi, all. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. I'm G-Rex.
And I'm Dirty Skittles.
Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. We'd love to listen to your feedback.
We can't do this without you guys. It's okay to be not okay. Just make sure you're talking to someone.